I want to start right off by saying that these are not views of ADB, these are not views of DOTR, these are my personal views. And I think this is a topic that's really dear to all of us. It affects our daily lives and it affects the lives of our loved ones. So traffic is a very important issue. But is traffic really the problem? And I have here, a nice image of trees and forests, and it's really to deliver the message that, very often we are too close to the trees to really see the forest. And before we actually work on the trees, we need to understand what kind of forest we want to create for ourselves and for the future. So this is an important message. Defining the problem as traffic implies that we want cars to go faster, that the objective is to make cars go faster. But sometimes, this becomes counterproductive. And I want to show a few slides to make this point. So very often to make cars go faster, we actually try to expand the road, but what do we do at the same time? We reduce sidewalks. To make cars go faster, we often think of elevating, the pedestrian walkway. So instead of putting it at street level, the crossings are now elevated. But what does this do? It also, in some cases, isolates people who are elderly, who are disabled, even parents with strollers who want to bring their kids around. They no longer are able to use this, this way of crossing the street. And to make cars go faster, sometimes we try to reduce even the volume or the number of vehicles on the road. But here in the Philippines, some of you may not know, we actually are reducing deliberately the number of public transport vehicles. For example, UV Express, jeepneys, buses. They are also subject to number coding. And of course, this is because some people believe there is an oversupply. But if you were to ask, many of the people that you see in this image, these pictures, they certainly wouldn't say that we have an oversupply of public transport. So when we try to make cars go faster, are we actually shooting ourselves in the foot? And this is what I want to talk about. What should really be our question and what should really be our objective? So measures to help cars go faster often make matters worse. And this we see when we force people to rely on cars instead of walking, biking, or public transport. So as in those earlier pictures, they were examples of how we were forcing people to prefer cars over walking and public transport. So if streets are unsafe or difficult to walk on, we end up actually encouraging people to use cars. People will want to use private cars and motorcycles for their daily travel. And we know, of course, the result of these measures. More and more private vehicle use on limited road space leads, of course, to more traffic. And these are some of the headlines that we've seen in the last few years. Every year, record levels of private vehicle sales, cars and motorcycles. And if we do the math, you'll see that every day we are adding about 500 new cars into the population in Greater Manila. And this isn't even counting about 1,000 to 2,000 additional motorcycles every day that we are adding to the vehicle population. Another key message is that it doesn't make sense or it's not feasible for us to keep widening roads or expanding the amount of road space in order to deal with the congestion. Just for the 500 vehicles, you would need to build an additional 10 kilometers of road every day just to keep the congestion constant. So that approach, I think we have to abandon that as a feasible option. Now here's just to inject some humor. More roads, flyovers, and bridges, which are for cars, they tend to also attract additional car use. And that, of course, brings on more traffic. And here we've seen, we've seen our own bridges, flyovers get built, and in a short period of time, they operate like parking lots for part of the day. What is the state now of public transport versus private vehicle use? The bad news is that we are today losing the battle. The share of private vehicle use is rising, while the share of public transport is declining. With the different surveys that have been conducted, this is the pattern, and we don't have to think very much of why. We know the reasons for this. When you have low-quality public transport, and if you discourage people from walking and biking, you end up with people choosing to use private vehicles. And even this recent initiative to try to survey people for Ambition 2040, I think there was an interesting finding that most Filipinos aspire to own a car. So this is something really that we have to guard against, because that will bring on, of course, more and more congestion. What should be our objective? Our objective should be to make public transport, walking and biking as the top choice of every person for their daily travel, even if they own a car or motorcycle. We want to push people in that direction. That is the only sustainable solution. This is what will reverse the trend that we are seeing today. So how do we make that happen? Well, let's try to dissect, the different strategies. We have to make rail and bus plentiful, affordable, and high quality. It won't make sense for us to push people into very crowded trains. You need people to take public transport because they know it will be a pleasant and a relaxing experience. That's what we have to aspire for. We have to create safe networks for walking and biking. We have to introduce incentives eventually for reducing private vehicle demand. How do we go about this? We have to look at how to make best use of our available road space, which is very scarce. And here, what we can see is that private cars are the least efficient way of using road space. We actually can move a lot more people through walking, cycling, and public transport, mass transit. So really, how can we migrate people from private cars and into these more sustainable modes? We need to think of what will convince people to actually shift from their cars into public transport. So we need to think of, what would convince ourselves? Because probably if we survey, how many people came to ADB today by car? A lot of us probably took cars coming here, and it's because public transport was not very comfortable, safe, or convenient. But if we look at maybe this formula, and this is just a sample formula, we could have a 10-10-10 target. 10 minutes to travel, to cover 10 kilometers, you need to do it in half an hour or less. That means that you should be traveling your mode of public transport at least 20 kilometers per hour. You can walk safely to a bus stop or a train station in 10 minutes or less. And your waiting time is also not more than 10 minutes. So these are some targets that could help define the density of bus stops and train stations. It could help to define also how you organize the transport services, what your capacity should look like. We need to expand urban rail. So today we have about 50 kilometers operating in Metro Manila. A city of Manila's size, a city like Manila, you know, when you look at Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, these cities have over 300 kilometers of rail. Greater Manila needs to have at least 200 kilometers of rail by 2030. We need to up, you know, our game. An additional 150 kilometers should be achievable over the next 15 years, meaning about 10 kilometers of additional rail every year. And we need to make these rail lines integrated, not the way our current rail lines look like, where it's very difficult for people to transfer from LRT2 into MRT3 or LRT1 into LRT2. You know, we need to have those transfer points very convenient. We also need to have an integrated fare system. Right now we have a single card, but we could do also more to make the fare structure integrated, as it is in many other big cities. An important message is this: if rail expansion remains the focus, while bus and jeepney remains low quality, we will not solve the problem. And the reason is, first, the majority of our public transport users rely on road-based public transport. Today, MRT3 is often packed because it provides a predictable travel speed. Once you get on the train, there is some predictability about the travel time. We need to bring that as well into buses and jeepneys. We need to make buses and jeepneys also high quality. Otherwise, you will still see a large migration of people into rail from bus and jeepney. Both rail and bus services, therefore, need to be high quality. We can't just focus on one without the other. Modernizing road-based public transport. So this is also one of the key programs of this government. You've heard about the public utility vehicle modernization. This is really an effort to bring in higher capacity, low emission vehicles that can actually move people more comfortably. But one thing people don't recognize, and I think is a very, very important part of PUV modernization, it is also about changing the business model. It's about consolidation. Today, we still have a lot of one vehicle, one franchise operators. That should not survive into the future because you need to have scale. In order to deliver quality, you need professional management. In order to have professional management, you need volume, you need scale. So this is why the government is encouraging private transport operators, the individual jeepney owners and bus owners, to consolidate, to create larger entities that can then operate a route franchise as a single team. Then we avoid also what they call the on-street competition for the passengers, which we have today. Bus rapid transit is also important because unless we actually make the buses have predictable travel times and faster travel speeds, we will not consider it as high quality. We need to liberate our bus services from the congestion that they are facing on the curbside. And this is possible by having dedicated lanes for buses and other forms of public transport. It's still new to the Philippines, but it's already a recognized mode of mass transit, high quality in many, many countries, especially in Latin America. This is where it has been proven to succeed even as a mechanism for bringing in existing operators of, the jeepney type operators, they've been able to actually transform themselves into bus operators in many, many cities in Latin America. Accessibility infrastructure is a very important aspect also. Walkways, bikeways, enabling people to cover the last mile, but also networks that can give them an opportunity to cover the whole origin to destination on foot or even on a bicycle. Incentives to reduce demand. This is what is also part of the formula, and we've seen this very successfully implemented in places like London, Singapore, Stockholm, congestion charging, where you have a zone where entry into that zone requires payment of a particular fee. Parking levy is also another instrument to discourage private vehicle use in a congested area. So there are many cities today where every non-residential parking space has to pay a tax, whether it's used or not. And the revenue from that is actually spent on improving public transport. So it's a very positive cycle that we create by discouraging private vehicle use and at the same time creating the resources to have better public transport. Now, this is where we need to have a clear picture of the forest. Today, there are about 25 million passenger trips already in the Greater Manila area. And that covers people who use cars, motorcycles, rail, bus, jeepney. We need to make all these trips high quality. This is a huge task ahead. We have to work on all modes and on all forms of sustainable transport. Some of this in the future will be through cycling, some will be through walking. Hopefully, there will be a lot of people who will be using rail and who will be using bus. And then we can achieve really a vision of having enhanced people mobility. And that really is the goal. That is the forest that we want to paint. Going for people mobility instead of car mobility. Getting people to actually move faster, more comfortably, instead of cars moving faster and more conveniently. So this is the future I hope we will paint together in terms of like the forest we want to create. And hopefully we can all work together, including ADB, towards this goal. So I want to just leave you all with that. Actually, this image here is something that is interesting to watch while maybe we can field questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robbie.